Welcome, children, to my neck of the woods. Oh, don't mind those figures in the shadows watching you. Here, let me tell you a story to keep your mind off of such things. A group of ponies find themselves within a maze of death. But is the maze truly there? Or is it a figment of their imagination? Or is it something else? Something else made by fear and revenge? Is it more than what it seems? This is the Dark Labyrinth. Written by the Clockwork Pony. Enjoy.
A constant clanging rang out all around Twilight. That horrid sound, that echoing constantly around her as she ran in this endless maze. She ran and ran, constantly in motion, not daring to stop nor even glance back behind her as she continued her blind gallop. Her focus solely on what is in front of her, and never stray near the walls of the labyrinth she found herself trapped in. The walls of that accursed hell, made of blackening brick and mortar, coated in blood, new and old. They seemed to be ever shifting, sometimes closing in so tight she had to reduce her pace as to not touch the walls, to opening up into large spacious rooms where the walls weren't even visible. Just suffocating darkness all around. Those decrepit-looking walls harbored that of a deadly secret inside them. Should one even barely nick the walls, they would release a sudden, violent torrent of horrendous blades. These blades being small in size but razor sharp, cutting and stabbing anything its tiny, terrible blades could reach. Something Twilight found out for herself when she attempted a moment's reprieve, suffering many small stinging cuts. They didn't even seem to be made to kill, just to inflict even more damage upon the maze's prisoners. Where the roof of that place should have resided was not. Instead, an endless black abyss of shrieking terror and howling screams was put in its stead. Twilight had already realized that before long in her time here, that everything in this nightmare place is made to inspire horror and torture upon those placed inside its confines. At one point she had attempted to stare and study the floating abyss when she reached a large straight corridor, only to force out a strangled scream from her throat. Ghastly demonic figures appearing in front of her wide eyes, their faces contorted into everlasting screeches of agony, or smiles that seemed to split the specter's face in half. Since that experience, she decided to never look up again at the pitch blackness out of fear of the figures doing more than just haunt her vision. The clanging seemingly encroaching ever closer, no matter how much farther she ran. Twilight had to choke back a sob as thoughts surfaced about the others that had been here with her at the start of the horror. There had been 9 others that she had awoken with in this place. The room she awoke in contained all of her new friends, including Spike as well as her brother, her mother, and her father. All of them confused and scared of where they were and what was happening. At one point their gaze was directed to the small, ancient sign that stood near the entrance to the labyrinth. The sign reading, "One may finish this maze, others fall to the darkness inside." Only when Applejack started to flail around wildly, gripping her throat as crimson blood spilled out and a large dark entity behind her, did they run headlong into the evil place. At first, they all tried to stay together, hoping that they could all make it out and make it harder for the monster stalking them to do harm. But after long, they were forced to scatter when her father was slaughtered before them, the beast having flung him against the nearby wall with enough force to splinter the wall while having a sickening crack permeate the air as every bone broke within his body, the blades coming out a moment later, stabbing him and firmly anchoring him to his position in the wall. After that, she caught glimpses of what was left of her friends and family as she continued to gallop. Or what was left of them. The sight of her brother lying cleaved in twain upon the ground, his entrails ripped out and lying around him in a scattered heap, made her vomit stomach acid up as she ran while trying to forget the sight. Rarity lied lopped on the floor, the front of her head covered in severe burns, and ash caked everywhere, the source made obvious soon enough, as there was a crater and smoke coming from where her horn should have been at the sight. Twilight swore to not try and use her magic. She caught sight of Pinky and her mother against the walls, seemingly fine. The sight made Twilight jump in joy before she sprinted over to greet them, only to notice a lack of motion from either of them. When she finally reached them, she found the cause that made her again vomit, the nothingness in her stomach. Pinky was in a pool of her blood, as her side was riddled wide open, one cut right into her eye, leaving what looked like a deflated ball in place, with the white fluid leaking out. Her mother, Velvet, was not much better, as the back of her head was jagged and broken open, pulp gray matter leaking out of her shattered skull. Both of them cut unexpectedly when catching their breath. She happened upon Fluttershy at one point, sitting upon the ground, staring into the abyss, just as Twilight was about to continue her sprint, as she did not wish to see what gruesome fate befell the kind, shy Pegasus. She heard a sound of gentle breathing coming from her. Excited that her friend was still alive, she ran over to check on her and encouraged her to keep going so that they would leave together, only to hear insane mumbles she got in return. No matter what she tried, Flutter would not budge and would only respond in insane mumbles along with twitching hooves and 1,000-yard stare. Eventually she was forced to accept that her friend was a lost cause, having succumbed to the madness that the horrid labyrinth inspired. Eventually she was forced to accept that her friend was a lost cause, having succumbed to the madness that the horrid labyrinth inspired. She left with a sorry and tears in her eyes. She had long since discerned the place in which she was trapped and knew of its horrors. Twilight knew that now she had only Spike and Rainbow left. She eventually once again gazed at the screaming dark sky to see if maybe there was not some magical exit or light that would banish the darkness. What instead greeted her was the sight of a familiar rainbow-scaled tail that belonged to the Cyan Speedster. Rainbow just hovered in midair, her wings frozen seemingly in mid-flap. She was facing down and seemed to have been trying to outrun something. due to the expression of utter terror plastered on her face. She seemed to have lost to whatever was chasing her, as blood openly flowed from somewhere on her back, creating a rain of blood onto the ground below her. But the worst was blood that leaked out from around her eyes and ears, small rivers running out of them. Twilight was reaching the burnout stage of her body at this point, having long since been tired, but she never chanced a rest, as the beast ever seemed to be far off from her position. As she slowed down to a trot instead of a run, she found Spike, a sight more gruesome than most of the others. Spike was not even recognizable anymore, as he was just a mass of red meat, sinew, and blood, as well as the small bones sticking out in random places. The only way she was able to identify the mess as Spike was from his still dripping, flayed skin lying a few hooves ahead of him. At the sight, she once again broke out into a hurried, panicked sprint. The sound was almost on top of her now, echoing from everywhere. She shook her head to clear away the morbid memories of her dead friends and family, tears flowing freely down her face. The sound of that monstrosity grows ever more near to Twilight. She finally began to slow down once again from the exertion of which she forced upon her body. However, a few more hooves ahead of her, she finally sees a light for the very first time since she has been in here, and thoughts run through her head, knowing that the hell is almost over. Over her shoulder she could hear the heavy footfalls and breathing of some large, lumbering beast, the light reminding her of the Solar Princess, Princess Celestia. The comforting thought of her old mentor fills her with a small boost of energy. Not wishing to succumb to the darkness, she close to the light. She forces her body to gallop full speed one last time to the source of the light. As she starts her sprint, the footsteps behind her begin to pick up in pace. The massive hoof falls, shocking the very ground, as it ran as well to catch her. The light emanates from a large doorway at the end of the corridor. As she closes in on it, a massive solid slab of stone starts to shudder its way down the doorway. At the sight of her only means of escaping hell closing right before her, she manages a final burst of speed. She just manages to dive into the doorway as it slams shut behind her, closing her out of the labyrinth and the beast inside. Twilight heard its loud roar of feral anger before it stomped off back into the accursed maze. She sat against the door as she sighed and wiped her head of the sweat from the running she was forced to endure. Every fiber of her being cried out in agony and fatigue as she just sat and caught her breath. All is finally silent around her as she stares forward into the light and smiles happily. Tiredness soon catches up with her as she determines that she should be safe before closing her eyes and rest for the first time in what seems like forever for her. As she rests, dreams of what lies outside this place, of going back to Ponyville with every pony else being alive and okay. The dream soon starts to shift as it goes back to her time in the deathly maze, remembering all of what she had seen in there, images of death and gutted friends and family everywhere fills her mind, causing her to cry out in her sleep. And the maddening echo of the screams of the damned. It shows her a scene of a large, burly beast, its shape resembling that of a minotaur, however being much larger and possessing an arched back with large horns and a shaggy fur. In one of its large, meaty hands was a great war axe, its two heads caked in blood and flesh. The beast bursting through one of the walls ahead of her, trapping her as it closes the gap. The sound of its heavy breathing and echoing stamps of its feet fills the dream as the only thing she could hear. Twilight's dream shifts yet again back to the more comforting memories of freedom before a terrifying thought grips her, causing her to sit up suddenly and shakenly. She had never seen what the beast actually looked like, nor had she seen it like she saw in her dream. Her eyes are open wide as she scans around the room in a panicked frenzy. All is the same as before, except the light that meant her freedom has dwindled down to nothingness and a large hole in the wall next to her. She sighs and looks back again, only for her eyes to meet two large glowing crimson eyes that burned like embers in fire pit lit the dark in front of her. She commanded her body to get up, to run away from the bringer of death, but it stayed as still as stone, her body no longer having the strength and gripped with absolute terror to do anything but continue to breathe. All Twilight can do is look on in horror as the dark being grunts in a laughing manner and brings his cruel weapon to bear before everything turned into darkness. A constant clinging rang out all around Twilight. Nightmare Moon stood over Twilight as she tossed and turned in bed, tears streaking down her cheeks. The dark alicorn leaned over the little pony, a sadistic smile on her face. She continued to watch the suffering unicorn. After a little while, she leaned down further near the tossing and turning pony's ear before whispering into it.
You thought you could simply blast me with your pathetic elements and that it would get rid of me forever.
Her face turned into an even more demented grin before she spoke again.
Well, you were wrong. You may have weakened me, may have left me without a corporeal form, but it will take more than that to put me down.
If one would have taken a closer look at the alicorn, they would have noticed she did not have hooves at all. Instead, her legs ending in flowing ethereal energy, making her float above the ground. She stopped for a moment to watch the withering Twilight, gaining even more self-gratification at what she had caused to the one that had harmed her.
This is your fault, you know. If you hadn't came along when you did, you wouldn't be forced to watch those you love die over and over.
A forked tongue slithered out of her mouth for a moment before slipping back in just as fast.
You may have even become my student instead of that bigot Celestia.
Her voice changing into a deep growl at the thought of the solar monarch before going back to normal.
But alas, you had to try and play the hero.
She stared at her.
This is some of my best work if I do say so myself.
She cooed into her ear.
It won't hurt you physically, but it will break you mentally, and no matter what, it will just keep looping.
She stood to full height before letting out a deep, resounding evil laugh into the cold, dark night air, the sound ringing out all over the quiet town. Once done with her victory laugh, she looked back down at the unicorn before adopting a caring look.
Maybe after you finally break, I could fix you, make you see the beauty and power that is the night.
Nightmare leaned down one final time and planted a small kiss on her forehead, the act causing the shaking Twilight to calm slightly in her sleep.
I have always wanted a student, someone to show the arcane arts to. But even more than that, I have wanted someone to call my own, a daughter.
She once again stood before moving over to the open window. the way she had came in. Sparing a look back towards the suffering pony, she uttered one last sentence before flying off into the night.
Sweet dreams, my little one.
One simple truth she